Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We've limped into this week, but it's the Screen Sermon Podcast, and it's the Boon. And this week, I'm here with Inky.
Hey!
Hey! And I'm not here with the Sex Robotica unit because he's had some kind of epic, terrible software crash of some kind. I don't know. He says he can't get... we record the show on Riverside.fm, and we've... Shout out to Riverside. And evidently he can't get the app to work on his phone because he doesn't own a computer at the moment. So he's been recording all the episodes on a phone. I don't know. So unfortunately no SR unit this week, but Inky and I will sally forth because, sir, we have to finish up the Alex Garland arc that we started, I don't know, 2 months ago or something like that. And so this week... we are going to talk about his most recent film, which is Men. But if we're being honest, and based on the subject matter of the film, the title is actually probably more like Men. You know what I mean?
Ugh, Men.
Ugh, Men.
I say you could almost just call it. You could almost just call it Man.
Man.
Based on the casting.
The most dangerous game of all.
That's right.
Man.
If only our protagonist had, like a good safari rifle.
So this film came out, what was it, 2022, right? It was last year.
Yep.
I didn't find any information about a budget, but I know it made $11 million. So not necessarily a box office, destroyer. But this isn't the kind of film that would be like that anyway. Generally well regarded from a review standpoint from what I've seen. And I gotta be honest, for the first time I think since maybe episode 3 of the show, we have been on a long run of talking about movies that I like. And this time, we've run into one that I don't.
I was going to open the exact same way, so... I say, I think this is, again, hills and valleys with everything as it goes with entertainment and art, but, this was the first one I was like,
Yeah. It was a disappointment after the experiences that we had with Ex Machina and then Annihilation, speaking specifically about Alex Garland's films, and the response that we got from the Ex Machina video, for example. Thank you to everybody who checked that video out. It's definitely our best performing video on YouTube. I thought that it was a very engaging episode. We had a great conversation and stuff like that too, so glad to see that was reflected in the views. And then I thought we had once we kind of repeated that and had a nice conversation about Annihilation and the themes behind it and things. Didn't perform as well as Ex Machina, but that doesn't matter. I still felt like it was a strong episode, and a film that was just easy to dig into. And then I watched Men, and it just doesn't live up to what the previous two kind of brought to the table. And in a way, it really just baffled me, and I ended up reading a bunch of articles about it after the fact, which kind of painted some of this picture for me. There was somebody, I want to say it was in The Wire, potentially, the Daily Wire, or something like, not Daily Wire, what was it?
Wired?
Wired, that's the one. Daily Wire is Ben Shapiro.
Oh, that'd be kind of weird, but...
Yeah, it wasn't that one.
I wonder what his take would be.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't like it either.
Well, is it the same one that I read, Wired, where it says, I don't know who this is for?
That's exactly what I was getting at, yes.
I read that one too, yeah.
Yep. I don't know who this is for. I have no idea. I would dare say that we are probably the target audience for this film from just with the genre and the director himself and his previous work. I would assume, 25 to 39-year-old males is the target.
Yeah, that would seem fair. I mean, based on the genre. I mean, even the concept itself, and that's what I found interesting in that article. I think the writer was correct, because who this would attempt to reach is probably not going to. And therefore, the folks that will see it and probably enjoy it, because I read some positive articles as well, are likely to not like really learn anything new necessarily. Yeah. It's just going to be kind of like beating a very similar drum for them.
Sure. And yeah, I think that it's I don't know. And you know, let's put a disclaimer at the top. Like, I understand that perhaps some of the reasons why I don't like this film, you could very easily circle that and just say, well, that's part of the problem, right? I mean, it beats the shit out of my gender or my biological sex, or however you want to make sure to say that in a decent way. And it's essentially putting it's very exaggerated, of course, but it's very much putting this thing where men are going to be men, you know, and one generation of men creates the next generation of men and teaches them to behave just like they behave and stuff like that, and it's just one thing after another after another after another. And while I'm not saying that toxic masculinity doesn't exist, because it absolutely does and it's disgusting, I agree, I also think that there are plenty of us out there who are trying to be something different and trying to, close the door on the generation that came before us because we weren't impressed by our own fathers and things like that. I think that there's plenty of folks out there that are trying to live differently. And this film still is just kicking you in the dick as well and saying, like, no, you're still the problem.
Well, me, it was not just the kind of what do you say, almost hectoring of it, but like it was just a little bit boilerplate in what it showed, and that's what I felt a little bit. I mean, again, I don't have the article perfectly at hand, so I mean, pardon if I'm misconstruing a little bit of what the Wired writer had written, but I'm like, I get it. I already knew all of this. Yeah. And again, it's not something I promote, agree with whatsoever. But I'm also like, kind of like, and what, you know?
Yes.
It's a very, very interesting genre twist that he comes up with in this, which once we get into the filmmaking itself, the storytelling, I was actually kind of amazed that this, from all accounts, I mean, from what we're shown, it seems like a very perceptive woman somehow didn't notice this, or if this is just somehow through her own view, I guess, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I feel what you're saying, that yes, I know these things exist, I know they're awful, but I'm like, and what? You know, like, I don't see a new avenue for either people that are victim to these men, the men themselves. It's just so many stories that you've already heard. Like, this is what's wrong. Sure. Yes. But also, what are solutions? What are ways to avoid these people? What are ways for these people to maybe avoid those parts of themselves until they can actually learn how to work through this kind of shit, you know?
Sure.
It just felt like a real long, like, kind of fun house of examples of awful people.
Yeah. And I feel like there's half of an interesting folk horror movie in this. And it's really like in the second half. And if the title wasn't Men, if it was just something else. And when the feeling of this film was more about like this concept of the Green Man, the imagery of the Green Man in the church, and then you had the homeless guy that Rory Kinnear plays but most of the male characters in the film are played by this actor named Rory Kinnear. He does a great job. I thought that, you know, he varied things up, and honestly, he slipped into different personas where I kind of wasn't seeing Jeffrey, the first iteration of him that she meets. I wasn't seeing him necessarily in every single character like I thought I was going to. He kind of reminded me of fucking Wormtail a little bit. Specifically when he's the vicar.
Oh, really? You saw him in The Vicar? I thought of Wormtail more with, I guess, the innkeeper, the first guy that we meet.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, he's a bit the more stumbly one, you know?
Yeah, that's true. He's got more of the mannerisms.
I will say, did make me laugh a couple times, some of that awkwardness.
Me too.
Especially when he's doing the crossword by himself, and he's just like, "Come on, fire up the engines." That was almost a little bit too. It was weird too, because like that character in particular, I read another one, I think it was on Mashable, that pointed out like some microaggressions from that character, and to me, and this will get more into the concept of it, but like I always thought that it was that version of this being, I guess, if we take it like the Thing, you know what I mean, or like say like an aspen tree, even if people who don't know, like aspens are basically one giant organism that connect underground. So if he is part of this organism, that I thought he was more like the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Because again, he's weird, but he's mostly just kind of seems kind of harmless and awkward. And again, he's the one that introduces her to the house. So why wouldn't he be kind of the introductory one? There was a scene later,
he's definitely the most approachable.
Yeah, no doubt. You know. Yeah. But like, and then there was a scene when we're in the pub, and that was where you really get the full blush, or at least the earliest full blush of the concept, where everybody is clearly of one type, of one person, basically. And that's where I was like, okay, maybe this does represent a little bit of a weaker but can be indirectly toxic male, since he sees obviously like the way all these other men are treating her, and he just kind of like laughs it off and doesn't want to say anything about it. Yeah, that was one kind of half-assed theory I had towards like, okay, I guess he's culpable before the later scene where we see him get violent as well.
Yeah, and there were some things I was trying to unpack with him in terms of like what is it that we're trying to like what is it that we're supposed to intuit are his male traits, like his toxic male stuff. Like I was trying to figure out what it was that he was doing that would piss feminists off, or like that would piss women off. Yeah. And other than just kind of being offbeat, I couldn't think anything, and maybe it's because I'm a woman, I couldn't really think of anything other than him being like, no, I insist, I'm going to carry your bags. And then later on in the pub, like it turned almost into a full-blown argument about how he wanted to pay for her drink and she didn't want him to. And so it's like, is that where it's coming from? Like, was that toxic masculinity, but through this kind of more of a beta male? Like, he's not overly aggressive. Of course, he gets aggressive later, as we come to find out. But I was trying to figure out, like, why is he being painted as kind of part of this whole process? He just seems to be kind of the bumbling landlord or owner of the property, of the house she's staying in. And, maybe he's trying too hard to be, congenial. I don't know. But, yeah.
No, that was my best guess, that either he was like kind of the one that was supposed to set her at ease to begin with, and then, later things would come, or again, like he's just, like you said, like more the beta-esque type. So where, and again, like there's part of the see something, say something. It's not just for yourself. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Sometimes and that gets very sticky though too, because sometimes people can feel a little bit, trouble with the word. I'll say like a little bit betrayed themselves if you report something that was really theirs, but they were not ready for it either. Like again, it gets very sticky. But and the pub scene, to me, that was the one where I was like, okay, I can kind of see where Jeffrey's, he's more of just like a dish rag, Yeah. And within this kind of mini society, that's still not a good thing. The best thing you can do with this village, unless you are this one man, basically is get the fuck out. Yeah. Which is why I was amazed in that there are two other women in the town. Like we hear the I forget the name of that job, like in first responders.
Dispatcher?
Yes, thank you. There's a dispatcher. We also see another police person who are women that are in this town as well. And that sort of like put a few questions in my head too, because I'm like, well, they must know, right? Did they not notice this? And then fed more to me like maybe it's our protagonist, almost like a projection of sorts. You know what I mean? Some of this. But that also asks so many other questions,
Like why?
Yeah, like that was my big question for a lot of this. I was like, but why?
Why? Because I thought the same thing. I was like, maybe as the audience, we're supposed to see all these men as Rory Kinnear, but she doesn't see it as just Rory Kinnear.
Okay, that's something I hadn't thought of, but it's an interesting.
I don't know.
Interesting take on it.
But again, why?
Well, I say this is a pretty awesome concept. It's that piece at the towards the very end of Being John Malkovich.
Mm-hmm.
Which, spoiler if you haven't seen that movie, but like he enters this portal where you can enter into his mind, and then everyone looks like John Malkovich, and all they can say is Malkovich.
Yeah,
it's a really weird and terrifying kind of concept. I remember this from if you ever beat the all the special levels on Super Mario World. When you pop back out around, it starts you at the beginning of the game, and then instead of wearing shells, the Koopa Troopas, they're wearing Mario heads. And that's what all the shells are now. That was one of my first like surreal, absurd kind of experiences with media. As a very young person, I'm like, but why? Why are they all Mario now? And again, I'm sure there's a somebody who knows much more about, say, like psychology and philosophy that could kind of break this idea down, where you kind of see the same thing everywhere. And again, my best bet is projection, which is not perfectly fit, because projection tends to be something that's inside yourself that you're now seeing outside everywhere. So that doesn't quite fit, so I'm using projection very loosely there. But again, a really cool kind of sci-fi, horror-ish, surreal concept that you could do a lot with. And one of the things I love about Garland is he feels a bit like Rod Serling in his way, where he finds a cool genre thing and he finds a way to give you a kind of real-life message through that. And I think he's very talented in that way. And this felt like a very Twilight Zone or Outer Limits-y kind of concept. And but again, I just kept going, but why? Even towards the end, after the fact, like 2 days after watching it, I'd kind of just grafted this idea of The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, where this is maybe one intelligence in this town.
Yeah.
And that still just didn't quite fit. But it was, again,
but I like that better. Because there's like I was saying, there's this concept of the Green Man.
Yes.
That I caught on a couple of articles, and evidently it's like a pagan entity. I actually didn't really get a chance to look at that. I was going to actually pull it up while we were talking, just so that we could go through a little bit of what the Green Man is supposed to represent. I was like, is that what it is? Like, is it some kind of a pagan god, like, took over this village and just decided to make everybody look like this one guy and mess with this woman? But why? It always comes back to that, though. But why? And I can't answer that.
And those quick splashes of that, whatever you would call it, I guess an idol. And then the scenes of the Green Man, I guess, this person with kind of flora growing out of him, which again, I should love. We've heard this on 2 separate episodes that I love people that turn into plants. But there you go. But I was still just scratching my head, because I'm like, well, that's an interesting idol or sculpture of some sort. I don't recognize it.
Yeah,
I'm not an anthropologist.
Right.
And again, there's a way to work abstract imagery that you never have to understand. Integrate stories. That's a big thing, I guess, ties into cosmic horror. The idea of seeing something that's very striking and hits you psychologically, but you can't really intellectually understand what it is. But that didn't feel like the case at all here. This was just like imagery that on its own looks great. I will say, the design and cinematography team did an incredible job on this one.
Yes, it's shot incredibly well.
Yeah, we had Rob Hardy back from the last 2 films. Also music by Ben Salisbury and Jeff Barrow again. I didn't notice the music as much this time, but again, I like seeing people work together that frequently. I feel like they find a good kind of cadence together. But yeah, just and for all the effects that we see at the end, which I thought was pretty well done. Again, I'm not the expert that SR is, and it was a very gross and weird kind of climax, so to speak. But yeah, I just never stopped scratching my head, like, but what does it actually mean? Like, what are we doing? And even
what are we doing?
There was a breadcrumb from earlier with a mutilation of a hand, that I will admit I didn't connect until I saw it. I'm like, oh, okay. But then again, just an even bigger question mark. When we get this reveal, we get this reveal towards the end, which would feel like the big aha, Shyamalan meets Hitchcock moment. But I'm like, still don't know. Like,
nope.
There's that guy.
Still
again,
not
I guess.
sure how that happened.
Yeah. Like.
So to give a bit of a bit more background there, this film effectively starts with, so we have Jess Buckley. She plays Harper, the main character of the film. Her husband is dead, and we are led to believe that he either committed suicide or that he accidentally fell off of the roof of their apartment building, their flat, if you will. So either way, she is having a tremendous amount of grief and is trying to deal with this by going on just kind of a self-reflection kind of vacation for 2 weeks in the countryside. And that's kind of where it goes from, and men won't leave her alone in this village. Men are gaslighting her, and I mean, for example, the vicar, she goes and sees him at the church, and he's basically breaking it down for her, like, well, we all know this is your fault, like, aren't you feeling that too, like that kind of thing. Blaming the death on her. Did you
let him apologize? Yeah, like that very awful shit. I'll say Vicar, probably my least favorite of this. Yeah, of this crew of the same guy.
Yeah. The weirdest, and then of course the worst effect of the film was Samuel. He's like supposed to be a 9-year-old boy, I think, and Rory Kinnear's face is CG'd onto this boy's face, and it doesn't look great. And he has some kind of a developmental disability of some kind or something like that, and he's inappropriate and violent as well, and calls her name. It's wall-to-wall unpleasantness anytime Rory Kinnear is on screen, which is pretty much the whole film. And so yeah, there was this half of the film where I thought I think forgot that the title of the film was Men, and I was just watching a movie. And I thought that it had something to do with this pagan entity called the Green Man. And I was like, okay, something's up with the Green Man. There's very similar tones to, I mean, Ex Machina and Annihilation. There's a lot of melancholy going on with Alex Garland in the films that he writes and directs anyway. There seems to be a lot of melancholy in there, and this is no different. I did notice the music and the sound design, and I really liked it, and it was some of my favorite stuff that was going on. Like when she's kind of doing the call and response to herself in the train tunnel.
Yes.
Very cool. Very unsettling. Like you're waiting for something to happen as she's kind of playfully listening to herself echo in this train tunnel. And then when you see the figure in the distance stand up, and it's just like the shadow, and it starts running toward her this really long distance, like that's fucking creepy. Like from a horror movie standpoint, I was like, that's great.
Well, and the sound that guy makes that calls back to her is
it's that
just,
like shriek bark thing.
Yeah, it's just guttural because she's making these great little like one person kind of melodies and harmonies, with this echo, and then he just goes. That's probably not a great rendition, but it's awful.
Well, and it's cool too because like her sounds that she's making turn into, like you said, a little like 4 or 5 note song, and they continue to use that later on in the film. Like it comes back in the score, and it's great. And then you come to recognize this kind of shriek bark thing from the figure in the tunnel, who you never really see which version of Rory Kinnear it is. You can only intuit that it's one of them. The shriek thing that the guy does, it kind of comes to be this creature's calling card. Like I took it to be the Green Man. I thought that's what we were kind of trying to get across. But then of course we start to kind of fade back away from the Green Man concept, and then in the middle of the film it's just men being shitty to a woman, like over and over and over again. And then toward the end of the film, the Green Man kind of becomes relevant again, and they bring him back in, and then of course we get into the scene where it's the Green Man gives birth to another version of Rory Kinnear, who gives birth to another version of Rory Kinnear down the, the Russian nesting dolls. And then at the end of that, it's the latest version of Rory Kinnear gives birth to Harper's husband. And you're like, the fuck? Like, why? But why?
Because every other version resembled Kinnear, or these characters Kinnear is playing. It's the first example we've seen of anyone that doesn't resemble this guy.
Right. Like, and there's the parallels of like the injuries that he had were happening to Kinnear's characters throughout the course of the film. Like the injuries that Harper's husband had after his fall. Yeah. Well, he died, but all of the things that happened to his body happened to Rory Kinnear's character throughout the course of the film. So, like, I kind of was getting it, but...
Well, and I remember, again, that was the part I got later and then pieced together after that. But, like, and that's where I get my best bet on what's happening is that maybe Harper has had, like, just a terrible, like, but weirdly... See, that's what's hard to contend with, because she's so stable and canny in so many other ways. But then for this to be just something from her own mind would be a pretty deep psychic break, from this grief and trauma, which would be understandable considering the circumstances. But the way it manifests and what we see of her otherwise just feels like a bit, incongruent,
Yeah.
Which, since we've mentioned her, I mean, important to say, I actually really liked Jessie Buckley in this. And I say actually because I feel like she wasn't given a whole lot.
Yeah.
For what she was given, I thought she was a great presence on screen. Like, I was never... I mentioned this in our Ring versus Ring episode, and I'm going to forget her name because I don't have it pulled up right now. But the lead in the Japanese Ring, I thought she did a lot of great work, but without doing too much... more obvious, I'll just diss us, American style acting, where everything, emotions are 0 to 100 a lot of times.
Right.
And I thought, Buckley just did a lot of great stuff with that. But her and then her character, though, I mean, it's just basically just being terrorized, Yeah. This felt like almost like on that front, like almost more like a grindhouse horror film. Like, there's really no point. There's like a half an idea, and then we're just gonna run through it for as long as we can.
That's really that's a great concept to throw out. This felt like an exploitation film.
Yes.
Where it's just like, let's just show you these oily, nasty, dirty men and the things that they'll say to a woman, and she's trying... Sorry.
All right. You got real grandpa at the poker table there. And a woman.
Or just like, she's trying to tell you this story, or she's trying to confide in you in some way, and you put your nasty little hand on her knee and tell her how all this shit's her fault. And it's like, I understand that men have the capacity to suck. Like, I understand it. But I disagree with this concept. If what you're trying to get across by making all of the characters that are male played by the same guy, if the concept that you're trying to get across is that all men are the same, I don't agree with that.
Certainly
If you're trying to say that, toxic masculinity is passed down from generation to generation, I do agree with that, but I don't think that it's 100% across the board for everyone, because I do think there are people that try to be better than the generation that came before them. Just like I think there are generations of people who were raised by perfectly stable and decent men and became pieces of shit on their own.
Also true. Sadly true. Yeah. But,
right.
Well, and, I mean, hell, we have to understand this, because what man would write this story if he didn't understand that there's a different type,
Right. It's an excellent question.
I highly doubt Garland is pulling from his own... maybe not completely, because, David Lynch admits even his villains come from some part of his psyche. Del Toro says a version of this as well. So, Garland may be doing some self-searching when he wrote this, but he must know that to even have this viewpoint, he's at least of a different sort himself.
Right. because you're not going to be, if you are one of a toxic male, if you are a piece of shit man that treats women this way, you don't view it as bad, you know, or something that can be viewed from a different angle. This is just the way it is for you.
Yeah, any serial abuser really can't, unless, I mean, they're very, very split to an almost like, you know, dissociative degree.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I kept coming back to in my head, and stop me if I'm just completely wrong here. Okay. This to me is not from a quality standpoint. I don't want to misread this. This is like Schindler's List to me.
Okay.
It's just like this horrible shit happens. Like, we all are aware that it happens. We've read about it on the news. We've read about it, you know, whatever. Like, we are aware that this took place. This is a film where you get to see some of the worst shit of that, you know, put on screen for you with a light veil of trying to make this into its own story, when really it doesn't do a great job at that. Schindler's List is like, we all know that the Holocaust, well, maybe not all of us, because I know there are some people that are deniers, but we all are aware that the Holocaust was this very awful thing that happened in human history, and now we're going to watch this movie where a lot of it plays out in front of our eyes. The difference, of course, is that there is an underlying story to Schindler's List that is supposed to be uplifting. It gives you someone to cheer for and things like that. Men doesn't have any of that. I mean, not that you don't cheer for Harper in terms of not wanting anything bad to happen to her, but it's nothing uplifting. You don't take anything away from it where you're just like, and those are the sacrifices that had to be made, and now things are like this, and this is what happened in the aftermath of that. At the end of this film, it's like, yeah, and society is still like that, and we already knew that, and like we all knew that. We knew all of this happened before. We know that it's happening now. So what did we gain from doing this? And when I bring up the Schindler's List thing, I mean to say that it's a film I watched one time because I was told I have to see it, and because of the content and things like that, I recognize it as a quality film, but the content is so unsettling that it's probably not something I would actively seek out to watch again. Men, I don't even have the quality piece other than liking some of the cinematography and the music, so it's just like I literally have no reason to ever watch this again.
I feel you, and like to your Schindler's List point, I think with that one you do see an arc, and granted, Oscar Schindler is not the hero from the start. He's a war profiteer. He seems very ambivalent to a lot of this stuff, but he learns something over time, which again I think is at least something, you know. Yeah. I think Men is like, if we're still comparing the two, it's like as if 90% of the characters were Ralph Fiennes from that movie, you know?
Yes.
Just relentless sociopaths run wild. And again, there's a version of that story. I was kind of thinking this when I mentioned before about exploitation. Like, you take the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's just, again, a fun house of nightmares. Yeah. And super awful people. But it knows what it is.
Yes.
And it can point to, in different kind of abstract ways, some different things. But it never seems to be kind of smelling its own farts, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's about just pure terror, you know, and that feeling of, again, in the folk horror tradition of being outside of your element, and you realize that the only dominions in this place are basically the wild and the handful of people that live here, you know? Yeah. And so, again, that one I think works. Yeah, and Cronenberg I saw it brought up a few times when reading reviews of this, and I can see some of that. There's some comments on body or bodily autonomy for one, but also like that kind of the surreal abstract pieces of Kinnear playing so many of the characters, and then again this wild birthing transformation that we see towards the end. Yeah, but I don't know. See, even like some of the lesser good Cronenberg I've seen still feel like it just leaves more of a mark, you know? Yeah. There's like things I've noticed, but I never quite thought about in that way. You know, again, David Lynch as well. I'm just like, holy fuck. Even hearing him, like, because he hates explaining his films, but even when he does give you like a random not random a scant kind of inspiration or thought about his movies, you're still like, okay, that tracks, but I don't know where the fuck the rest of this came from. and it still just makes me want to rewatch them and unpack them in my own way, because he's working off his dreams and more on the abstract end of his mind. This one here, you get it very quickly.
Yeah. And
like you said, it's just like a punishing trip of things that most of us are already very aware of.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm saying raising awareness of these kind of things isn't a valid thing to do. It's just this film in this genre by this director, and knowing who his films are essentially tailored toward, your message isn't going to reach those people, because women aren't going to come and watch this because they live it, right? I mean, that's supposed to be the whole concept. Is somebody had written about, like, if I wanted to see, what was that? Something about, like, if I wanted to have a concept of how, men could, put me in danger and hurt me, I can just walk outside.
I did read that, yeah.
Yeah, so, like, I forget who, and I'm sorry to misquote or not know who I'm quoting, but essentially just saying, like, every day I go outside, I feel these kinds of feelings. So going and watching an hour and 40-minute movie that's effectively about that, it isn't going to do anything for that person. She's already living that life. So why would she do it? And then us as men, we would go and see this film. We did sit down and watch this film for the show, for example. This movie definitely isn't for us, because the message is obviously not lost on us, because we understand that it's real, and that these kinds of things, obviously not to this extent in terms of how fantastical some of the shit is in this film, but we know that these things happen and that they're terrible. And then those of us who do not live this way and do not treat people this way and do our best to be respectful and and things like that, this kind of paints you as you're also part of the problem, and that's not a great feeling to have either.
True. Yeah. It's a very tough I don't even know what to call it, kind of a crossroads of sorts. But I will say this, like, I feel like if this movie was 10 years ago it'd come out, it may have been kind of like, wow, look at this, you know what I mean, kind of a movie. The inundation of, like, anything that catches fire in media nowadays, I think in some ways kind of takes away from the impact that this movie may have had,
Yeah.
And I think 20 years ago, I don't know where this movie would have played outside of, like, maybe parts of Europe. And it would have become like a cult classic over the next, 10 and then 20 years, what I'm saying? It would have been like kind of a herald of what we would have eventually learned more through things like Me Too and what have you.
Yeah.
But at this, well, not this exact stage, obviously this was a year ago, but within this this corridor of our point in history, it does feel like a little bit of just a reminder,
Yeah.
We're like, yep. Like, and I don't even know that the people who are, the men that operate this way, even maybe say used to operate this way, I'm sure they're just like, yes, I know. Like, I wake up, I wake up with in a cold sweat of guilt every day, So yeah, it's like, like I say, everything else is just very on point. It looked great, sounded great. Again, Rory, for that's not an easy job to play that many characters in a film. I mean, I can only think of a handful of examples, like Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers have done it in comedic ways. To do it in a dramatic way, and then also in a various forms of intimidation kind of a way, and not like have it get to the point of its own parody, is pretty amazing. Yeah,
I thought he did a really good job.
I do want to check out more of Jessie Buckley's work. She's apparently a musician as well, and I apparently she was not a discovery with this film. She'd already done some other independent films that had gotten some really good marks, especially her work on those. I'm very interested to check out more of her stuff.
definitely. Yeah. No, I don't recall. She looks familiar to me, but I'm not 100% sure what I would have seen her in. But I thought she did an excellent job. That's the thing. It's like the performances are there, the technical aspects are there, the music and the cinematography is there. The production design is great. The setting, the country house that was like her dream getaway vacation thing that she decided to do for herself. I thought the house was very effective. The tunnel, I thought the tunnel was a great set piece. So whoever scouted that location, or God forbid, I doubt they built that thing. So, whoever scouted that location, bang up job. And there are kernels of a good movie in here that have nothing to do with what the film ends up being about. But of course, that's not what we get. We get men. We get men. And, it just... men. Fucking men,
Yeah.
When are we finally gonna smarten up and just live without them? It's like, that kind of shit. And
I read a pretty intellectual book that had pictures that talked about this very thing. There was one guy left. It did not go well.
Is this why the last man?
Yeah. This
nice.
The dude at the comic book shop that just became a feminist this morning.
And then, and then there's the other piece of it, like Alex Garland and the quotes and stuff that I read from him. Like, he didn't want to explain himself. Like, he really didn't want to dig into, similar to what you were saying about David Lynch. Like, he didn't really want to tell people what they were supposed to kind of get from it.
Yeah.
And since there was all this confusion, I think, about like who was this for, and or as you and I keep saying, but why did that happen? He didn't want to do that, and so that frustrated me. Where I think it's just I want some answers and I'm not getting them, and so it pisses me off. And then, the other angle of like I was desperately trying to make connections to shit, and I was desperately trying to make some of it make more sense rather than, because I really just didn't want this movie to just be about fuck men,
right?
But it is. And so, when the Green Man gets his hand bifurcated by Harper's knife when he sticks it through the mail slot, for the rest of the film, Rory Kinnear is always seen with that injury, and it splits his right or left, I can't remember which, but it splits his hand into two hands. And I'm sitting there thinking like, ooh, okay, earlier on, Jeffrey drops the line about, because there's also this Garden of Eden thing, where she eats the fruit from the tree. It's the very first thing she does when she arrives. And then Rory Kinnear, Jeffries, tells her that she can't eat the forbidden fruit. And then he's like, just fucking with you, you can eat as much as you want. And the line that he drops on her, though, is that, honestly, they all end up falling to the ground, spoiling, and then they attract hornets or wasps. Yeah. And I was like, okay, when Homeboy gets his arm bifurcated later, it looks very insect-like, because it's like he's got the two segment, like it's almost like he has 6 legs now. Like, and I'm trying to pull it. I'm like, maybe they're the wasps, like, because there is a scene where all the apples fall off the tree, and I feel like that's when the shit hits the fan.
True. Well, and
they all start coming for her.
That is a great image. Actually, I kind of forgot about the whole forbidden fruit thing, because So a couple of things. There's apparently no way that was an apple. Well, again, it wasn't even written originally as an apple, but let's call it an apple because that's what we've always understood it as. The forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden
story.
What do they call it? The Tree of Knowledge, I think it was called. And again, even more modern translations is always blamed for that. She was the one that got tricked by the snake. And again, it's become a very a point up amongst feminists, why, there's been this kind of guilt over being women for quite a while in our society, Western societies at least, Yeah. So again, I can see why you're using this image of the apple and the forbidden fruit, but I come back to, but what else?
Yeah. What else is there?
Yeah. Like it's a really cool image, especially like later when you get those strobes and then you get a different version and the apples fall from the tree, like the crow going through the window. Or was it a crow or a raven? I never know.
It was a small black bird, so I'm not sure.
Probably a crow.
It might have been a rook.
A rook even. Okay.
Yeah, I don't even think it was big enough to be a crow.
I didn't even consider it a rook. I didn't know till recently, only a couple of years ago, that ravens are bigger than crows. I always thought ravens were more like you could fit them in your hand size, but
no, they're fucking huge.
Yeah. But yeah, the black bird through the window, I mean, it's a great image, and then when the mask, the dime store girl mask that we see the young man wear earlier kind of just scuttles over to it and goes over it. Fucking really creepy, weird, cool image. Yeah. But after, I'm just like, okay, just on to the next one, I guess.
But what does it all mean, man?
That's why I say it's a fucking fun house. It's just like one wild shit after another. But again, it's not a fun house that understands it's a fun house. It's a fun house that thinks it's proving something, Right. But again, and it sure does reflect a lot of very known and or relatable things. But it never got past that.
No, I don't think. It doesn't have anything else in it, despite my best efforts. I was just like, they're fucking calling back to the wasp thing, man. Like he's got the separated arm segments. It's supposed to look more like insect legs, and then of course you get the reveal later on. Like no, that was what's his name? James was her husband. That was his injury because he had fallen on a wrought iron fence. And you know how them fences look like they got the spikes and shit, and his arm got bifurcated by it on the way down. And so that's when I realized, okay, he's receiving all of the injuries that James received during this fall. So he gets the broken ankle, and he gets she hits Jeffrey with a car later on, and I'm sure that's where like the internal injuries are manifested from and stuff like that. And so I was like, okay. I liked my idea better, where you were calling back to the wasp thing that you talked about at the top of the film, but whatever. That's
never a good sign, by the way, when you're watching a movie and you say, I like my idea better.
Yeah, like, you got paid, I don't even know what, and you were given a budget of however millions of dollars to make this movie based off of an idea that you had. And then, okay, I'm one guy, and sure, like, your film made $11 million, so a bunch of people at least thought enough of it to go and see it and give it money and stuff like that. But I'm sitting here watching it and just like, I feel like the movie that I would have made based on what you're if you gave me the pieces, I would have made a better movie. That sucks.
That's not good news, no. I've had that with a pretty rare few things. I mean, because I tend to shoot kind of high, maybe even out of my league with a lot of my entertainment and art that I put in front of me. And
sure.
So yeah, every once in a while I do get that. There was a book, I can't even remember the name of. It was like some kind of a sci-fi book. And I remember getting like maybe a third into it. And I'm like, dude, I was like, and this was the person's like fourth or fifth book. And I was like, wow, like published like book. Yeah. And I was just like, I had that exact feeling too, where I'm like, I like my idea better.
Yeah.
I'm not a person that's too into his ideas a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Not for passing few moments, but yeah.
I want to be one of those guys. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, not for a passing few moments at the most. So if I'm saying that, then, man.
Yeah.
You need a good editor, maybe.
Yeah, like, I'm not full of my own shit.
No.
But, like, I would love to be that guy that gets handed the keys to, like, an already established novel franchise that has gone off the rails.
That sounds amazing, doesn't it?
Yeah. Like, I don't have to establish this world, but I can fix all the shit that I feel like you messed up. I feel like I'd be good at that.
You heard it here, folks. The Boon is going to finish A Song of Ice and Fire.
Give me the keys, George. So yeah, I had a few, and there was this whole thing about the Green Man. I was stuck on this Green Man thing. I'm like, it's a fucking, she's up against a pagan god. This is going to be awesome.
Which is why I never, again, like so many of the reviews I said, they're like, it's such a folk horror. They really like doubled down on that. And I'm like, but it's not really though.
No.
Like it's missing a lot of those. I mean, okay, she's outnumbered. She's in a remote place, yes. And it's all the locals that are causing most of her issues. But still, like the high concept of it to me really takes away from any kind of feeling of a folk horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, and again, it almost tips a little bit towards, like, say, Rosemary's Baby, that feeling of being gaslit and outnumbered, no one really to turn to, all that. But again, it never quite sunk in that way either. But say more about the Green Man. I'm curious what you think. I have a couple more things to say about it too.
It was just, I feel like they kept all of the, like, iconography. They kept going back to the image of it. And they certainly foreshadowed the end where you had the sculpture of the woman in childbirth pose, essentially, and like she seems very much in a birthing position, that kind of thing. And it was always related to images of the Green Man. And we get this story in the beginning, not story, but I guess we get this teeing it up for us that when all the fruit falls off the tree, it brings the wasps. And I thought it had something to do with that, like this pagan god had taken over control of this village for some, because that's in a lot of Greek mythology, you'll hear stories about X god takes over this town for a while and just fucks with the people because it entertains them.
Yeah, they're pretty awful. Most of the Greek gods were assholes. Also a lot of kidnap and rape amongst those gods.
Yeah, tons. Cannibalism, like it's all over those stories. And so in this one, I'm just like, okay, so a pagan god takes over this small little village and, makes all this crazy shit happens where, like, all the men have the same face and they're all, these toxic pieces of shit. And this woman comes to heal from her own experience with a husband who was, a terrible, toxic man, blaming his own suicide and his, whatever was going on with him, because they reference in there that, like, things have been bad for a year, but they don't exactly say what's going on. I took it to mean, like, maybe he lost a job or was going through some kind of mental health problems, something like that, and that she wasn't standing behind him according to his I'm doing air quotes, sorry, I realize this is an audio medium, but yeah, very much blaming her for, like, you didn't have my back for the last year kind of thing. And so, like, she's going out there to heal. Now this pagan god is taking over this thing. We get this little teeing it up thing about, all the fruit falls off the tree and you're not protected anymore, is effectively what I got from that. That there's some magic here. And it seemed to be working out that way when all the apples fell off the fucking tree, and that's when all the Rory Kinnears started coming after her.
Yep.
But slowly but surely, it drifted away from that, where it's like, I don't even know why the Green Man is in this anymore. Like, one of the Rory Kinnears is the Green Man, and I don't know why.
It's just, I guess, it's some, like, very esoteric, like, way to explain what's happening. Like, that stuff always, again, it intrigues me. Any type of, like, callback to, say, like a more pagan kind of god, religion, ritual, And again, like the other end of it, the concept that we're seeing where this whole village is kind of one guy, is also super intriguing to me, and never do all the pieces get close to connecting. And that's where I feel like too, because, like, I think Annihilation, Garland really hit a great balance of abstract and also more concrete understanding of what this plot and what is happening. We see the background. We can kind of feed in a little bit, as you heard with our discussion. There's a lot of different ways you can take this, and there was a lot of different ways that the even more educated film folks took that one. But here it just seemed like just a real crazy hodgepodge, and then, like, where I say, like, just a touch of exposition, If your ideas do make sense inside your own head, sometimes you got to give us, the audience, just a little bit of that. Yeah. Exposition gets a bad name. It's a very easy thing to call out certain movies for, and it is used and overused a lot of times. But without it, certain movies just fall kind of flat, like this one did. And again, you just keep going, but why?
Yeah. I think there's a way to eloquently deliver exposition.
Oh yeah.
There's a way to be clever about it, and there are multiple ways. I'm saying it like there's only one way to do it. I think there's a way to force exposition where it's just like, Jesus, that was corny, and then I think there's ways to fold it into your story and make it just a beautiful way to help me understand what's happening. Maybe without being so overt and just straight up telling me, but you're giving me the pieces to put it together myself. Awesome. Yeah. I would have loved to have that in this movie. So
And certain stories they need exposition. Like hard sci-fi needs exposition, you know?
Sure.
If you're hoping to reach an audience besides the people that have studied this particular branch of science.
Yeah.
Mystery stories, detective ones, tend to be mostly exposition, exposition that tends to be carried out a lot of times through conversation. There's a lot of interviews, and once in a while they have that either partner or some other kind of confidant that your main inspector is working with, you know?
Yeah.
So
he's the everyman.
Yeah, those stories work
that
well.
We project ourselves onto that guy. So
yes,
that
exactly.
When Sherlock is fucking explaining himself, we can be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you need the Watson, of course, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although he was a doctor, so he was brilliant in his own way.
Yeah, arguably smarter than Sherlock in different ways. Sherlock had a very unique intelligence, at least the original way he was written.
It was very reactive and instinctual.
Yes. Yeah, he had a very specific set of skills, so to speak.
Yeah. But, so I looked up the Green Man, of course, on Wikipedia, so, you know, fucking skewer me in the comments if you want, whatever. Just, I wanted to give an idea of, like, what are we supposed to get out of him? And I went down to the modern paganism one, because most of it is about the sculptures, which evidently there are many, and how he is portrayed in literature. So I figured we would go to the literature thing. So let's see. The Green Man has been asserted by some authors to be a reoccurring theme in literature. Let me see here. The Green Knight was another thing that actually I was thinking about, how Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that whole story. The Green Knight is a depiction of the Green Man. I thought they were related, and it turns out that they are.
Wow.
The Green Knight in this poem serves as both a monster antagonist and as mentor to Sir Gawain, belonging to a pre-Christian world which seems antagonistic to, but is in the end harmonious with the Christian one. So that just, like, I know that he has different, meaning the Green Man, has different iterations or different forms that he's taken over the years. But in modern paganism, they talk about how the Green Man is used as a symbol of seasonal renewal and ecological awareness. And in Wicca, the Green Man has often been used as a representation of the horned god, syncretic. I don't know what that means. Syncretism is we can go down a fucking rabbit hole, is the practice of combining different beliefs and various schools of thought. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. He's a syncretic deity that incorporates aspects of, among others, the Celtic Cernunnos and the Greek Pan. He does seem like an avatar for Pan.
Even just like, his like his pose and posture in that image, he feels a bit Pan-esque. Yeah,
I agree. So yeah, I mean, this whole idea of renewal, like, is that where this birthing thing comes from? But then why is it the husband at the end? And why does he basically just say, all I want is for you to love me? And then she just kind of smiles, and then fucking credits roll, and we're supposed to be like, I get it. Because I don't.
Boom. Gotcha. Like,
you got me, Alex Garland.
You didn't this time, Alex. I'm sorry to say.
You missed me entirely.
Yeah. Well, and hearing all that again, that's a lot of different avenues for this, but I don't. Almost none of them ring any kind of a bell towards what that would feed into this film. Again, aside from just being that thing, it feels like too, like what, you know, when it's weird because he's such a practiced writer, he's such an experienced writer. And in previous stories, such a nuanced one as well. But like, it just feels like one of those things where you find something cool, you know? Fuck, I'm going to throw that in here too. You know what I mean? Which it can
what I can say?
It can be super fun on its own. There's a lot of musicians that are basically, that's their whole theory on making music is like, fuck, that sounds cool. Let's throw that in there, you know? And I dig it. But like, there's other times where you're like, what the hell? Like, what? Okay, it looks cool and it sounds cool, but like, what the fuck does it mean?
Right. Yeah. How does that help me get to where you want to take me?
Yeah, and again, like sometimes atmospheric shit is great, you know, when you have a gothic, you know, a gothic horror story, you see a gargoyle. I mean, does the gargoyle mean anything? Not necessarily, but it looks, the image of it matches the mood you're trying to set, you know. And here I'm like, okay. I mean, you're pushing this idea forth so much on the front. I'm looking for more behind it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And therefore, I look into these things that are older and more symbolic, and again, find kind of nothing. or something, but
it's
something
hollow.
that has nothing else to do with this.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah. I don't know. I there's just, it's so thin. It's so thinly. There's just nothing there, and I got nothing out of it, and it really. I think the only emotion that I took away from it more was there was the frustration piece of wishing that it was a better film, and then on top of that, I almost felt like it was insulting to a certain degree, just because it's like, you know.
When you mentioned something much earlier on that I had not. If this had been called something else, I think it would have definitely changed my expectations for one. I think if I didn't know this was an Alex Garland movie, so if both of those things had happened, I may have given this a different kind of shot. And again, maybe wouldn't have had an overall better grade, so to speak, by the end, but would have maybe had a little bit less kind of confusion and disappointment. You know. Honestly, I there's a part of me that says, like, I'd love it if they just would have swung even more exploitative, you know. This is just like the final act. It's like all the men have shown up and she somehow subdues them and just like with one knife throw cuts all their dicks off.
There you go.
Just
threads the needle.
Just a dozen disappointingly small dicks just whacked right off, you know.
Smaller the better.
Yeah, just one swift kitchen knife throw, and they're just whacked, just all of them gone.
I would have loved that.
Then her pregnant friend shows up, and she's like, "What the hell happened? What are all these dicks doing in the yard?"
That's right. I forgot her friend is pregnant when she finally gets there at the end. Oh, that's another thing I wanted to mention to you real quick. When her phone's fucking up, did you notice that Rory Kinnear's face would pop up in like the static and stuff, like really just showing you that he's everywhere? Anyway. But yeah, so she has a friend that she's on a video chat with at several points during the first half, and then you kind of lose her because she's like, I'll be there in 4 hours, you know. It's a 4-hour trip, and sure enough, she shows up after everything's happened, and you know, there's this smile because she sees a woman, I guess, or her friend, so now she feels safe. But it turns out her friend is pregnant, and I'm sure that was very intentional. I
guess. I don't know. Like, okay, cool, she's pregnant. It's weird too, because of if we had just seen her earlier, and maybe this is something just with movies in general. Whenever you see a pregnant woman, you think it means something. You know what I mean? Like, depending on the film, you feel like she's going to be put in danger. Other times, you almost expect that she's going to have this kid within the movie. But it's so rare, now that I think about it, that you have just a pregnant woman just operating like a person. like all pregnant women do from about conception up to the birth. They're doing shit. Ask one of our co-hosts, Brandy, you know?
Yes.
Right, doing shit right now.
Yep. Shit's still got to get done, whether you're pregnant or not.
That's exactly right. Sometimes you got to drive out to the country and check on your friend.
Yep.
But yeah,
I saw some thinly veiled bullshit.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, it's funny, I hadn't thought about it till now, but it seems like a weird surprise only because we've only seen her in profile up to that point.
Yeah.
But it's like, fuck, she's pregnant. Okay, why wouldn't she be?
And after the hour and 39 minutes of what we had just seen, I couldn't help but and I'm sure if it did mean something, it was innocuous enough that I could have also just taken it as, oh, she's pregnant, and just let it go like you were saying. But at that point, I just took it as a further, like, dig, where it's just like, you know, oh, my female friend is here, and look, she's pregnant, which is what us women can do.
Right.
Because fuck men. You know?
Right.
And
all y'all give birth to is more dumb dick versions of yourself.
Right.
Dumb little dick versions of yourself, dicks.
That's what it should have been called, is dicks.
Would have been almost better, but it would have needed my ending, though.
Yeah, 100% it would have needed your ending. Oh, man. I wanted to make sure, not saying that we have to be winding down, but it feels like we're getting there.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure to shout out, SR wrote wrote some things in the chat because he was like, God damn it, I will be heard, I guess. Yeah, specifically he said, I guess I'll type some shit here then, because fuck me in particular. So, here's what the Sex Robotica unit had to say about men. Let me just read through his stuff real quick, and then maybe we can comment on his and see what's left, if anything. This podcast has more depth than the film it was based on. Anyway.
Now that's a litmus test.
Right. There are so many times. So hold on. Sorry, SR. We will read your shit. Give me a second. I feel like this is episode 27. I feel like in 26 episodes we have covered either the Oscars, of course, or a film series or a single film. I always feel like we left something out there, like something on the table that we forgot to talk about, a scene that we didn't mention, or whatever. In this one, I feel like we've covered it. Like, I feel like everything we said is what it is.
Sadly, same, man. I'm hoping SR has something, because I remember him saying he's the only one that saw it before this, and he seemed to like it. So I'm very curious to see what he has to say.
Yeah, I think he liked it. So let's see what he has to say about it. Let's see. Okay, so he says the overarching themes of men seem to be grief/trauma and overcoming it, like we see in a lot of other horror films post 2010. I like the way it was done here. There's a really neat scene where Harper is playing with her echo while going through a tunnel. As she goes further into it, she seems visibly happier. I took this tunnel to represent her path towards recovering from what happened with James. Her seeing the man at the end and turning back, not truly getting to the other side, overcoming it, and rather running away back to where she was before, was really neat. That's a cool concept in terms of if she had made it through the tunnel, it was this visual symbol that she had gotten past it.
Sure.
There are some blatant themes about generational toxic masculinity and misogyny that are evident just from the title of the movie, Men. Women are historically blamed for many misdoings throughout history, two of which are alluded to or shown in the film. One of these was the obvious forbidden fruit with Eve picking the apple, but we didn't. Oh, but she did pick an apple. But as Inky pointed out, in the story itself, it wasn't necessarily an apple. It was just a fruit, right? Forbidden fruit.
Yeah, I think they said it was supposed to be like a pomegranate. It's like one of those dumb translation things from way back.
Ooh, another good shout, though. If it was a pomegranate, that was the word that Jeffrey was trying to figure out on the fucking crossword.
Hey!
Huh?
You're right. Who knew?
How about that?
All right, we figured something out.
I didn't fucking depth in there. It's like a teaspoon's worth of depth. So picking the apple causing Adam and Eve to be cast out of Eden. The other is mentioned by the vicar during a later scene where he recants a poem in which Zeus swoons over a woman as a swan, which the vicar calls himself. I do remember that.
Yep.
Which eventually leads to the Trojan War in the mythology. I forgot about that part. Another neat detail I only just noticed upon this rewatch, going back to the theme of it all being a cycle in which these toxic traits are passed down during the rebirthing scene, you know the one. Each time Rory Kinnear is reborn, it is through a more fucked up way. First it's through the Green Man's mangina, then the belly button, then the back, and then through the throat. It's also super interesting that the child I cannot remember the name of, but much like every non-James man in the film, is also Rory Kinnear, is wearing a Marilyn Monroe mask, which I never noticed before. It's worth noting she's a sex symbol and a symbol of femininity. So you called it a dollar store woman. That's all he had. You called it a dollar store woman mask. That didn't read as Marilyn Monroe to me.
No, I couldn't have read it as one person, because it just looked like a cartoon drawing of a blonde woman.
Yeah, and it looked like one of those like posters from the 50s.
Well, I mean, that would be Monroe.
I guess so.
She was the queen of that, or at least became that.
Yeah.
And again, a symbol not of just femininity, but also very much through the male gaze, you know?
Mm-hmm.
She was like...
Men.
Maybe not the first, but she was arguably like the first tipping point of the sex symbol in media in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the Zeus story, I don't know. I remember him talking about stuff like that, and then he does refer to himself as a swan, which again, I feel like there was an idea there that was supposed to have some kind of meaning or some kind of depth, but it didn't play that way to me.
Yeah, it felt like Garland was kind of just like harking back to a lot of things he read in literature class. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of like whapping them together, just like, here we go, here's some more.
Yeah.
Oh wait, what about this thing?
And so I don't know about his concept of how each of the rebirthing scenes, being a more like disturbing image. Like, I don't know if that's supposed to indicate that each generation is worse than the last or something. Like, it's getting progressively worse as the generations move on. I don't know if that's what that's supposed to mean. I don't know. Because again, none of this is clear, and I'm not above. I mean, similar to you, like, I have a tendency to go, I want things that are over my head so that I can think about it later. Mm-hmm. And discuss it on this show or discuss it with my friends and family, things like that. I don't want it, though, to be so far above any concept of reasoning that I end up getting nothing, where I can't actually figure out what it is.
Yeah.
That's not satisfying. And I remember a point I was going to make earlier. When it was being likened to this film, when it was being likened to kind of being born out of the Me Too movement and things like that, Alex Garland kind of scoffed at that a little bit, or backed away from that association, because he said he had been writing this script for 15 years. And so it predates Me Too, essentially, is what he was saying. But maybe that's part of the problem, is that it took you 15 years to fucking write this story, and you probably changed things multiple times, and maybe originally it was about one thing, and then it became about another thing. And at the end of it, it turned into this, which is just nothing. It's a bunch of potential concepts that are left at the side and never used.
Yeah. Yeah, they never get that far, or to your point earlier, that deep.
Mm-hmm.
That's weird, too. I wonder why he would scoff, I guess, at it. Maybe it's like he's like, oh, I was way ahead of the curve. I mean, that doesn't sound like him.
That's kind of how it read.
Really?
Yeah.
That doesn't...
a little bit.
What I have read of him, it doesn't sound like him, but, I mean, who knows? I don't know him personally, so...
That's how I took it. I also read the article right after I watched the film, so I don't know if I was just, like, pissed. Like I was in a place where I was mad. So
that happens.
I just read it that way.
Yeah. That's surprising, though, too, that he spent 15 years, and maybe you're right. Maybe he just kept going too many directions with it, and then finally was like, "Here it is," I know a lot of other great writers and artists have done that too. Their like long-term project they've been waiting to do, it comes out, and you're like, "Wow, that's what we were waiting on." Yeah. I like the one you did in 2 years.
Yeah. I like the one where it's like you didn't sleep that whole time, and you're fucking, you're on the David Bowie diet of, peppers and milk or some shit and cigarettes.
The Thin White Duke, they call it. Yeah.
Like that. I feel like that was your best work, not the one that you were so meticulous about that I literally fucking crossed over into a different version of my life by the time I got to read it.
It's a very Chinese democracy, Well, that's the thing, meticulous. I'm like, it would seem that way, but it's like, man, like maybe just picked it apart too much,
Yeah.
Like that. It was just too many. It was just the bare bones at that point,
Yeah.
Not enough ligaments and tendons to really bring them all together, or flesh to put out.
That's a fair point.
On the outside of it, to continue this kind of poor analogy, but. Well, see,
I was going to go with food. I was going to say you can only deconstruct something so many times.
Yeah.
Because eventually at the end of it, it's like I quadruple deconstructed this steak, and I'm like, it looks like fucking pudding to me at this point.
Yep. I've had one of those where it was like fucking meatloaf, and I'm like, I don't like this. Like, I like steak to have some texture, please.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's all I got, man. I feel like that's all I have to say.
That's everything for me too. I know
about men.
Yeah. Ugh. It's too bad we kind of
have to close one eye to do that. Anyway, go ahead.
I seen it, folks. He did. I saw that, and I saw the air quotes. But no, I say, it's a little too bad that this arc of ours, this first arc of ours, had to kind of end on a little bit of a down note. But I mean, that's kind of how it goes. I always point to the De Palma documentary. Had a what on for most folks, if they think of him, Brian De Palma, a pretty storied career, you don't realize how many other weird little like sidetracks and kind of like missteps that he had. I mean, he probably don't call them missteps. He's still a very proud man, as you'll see in that documentary. But
sure.
But yeah, sometimes you make Scarface. Sometimes you make a weird comedy with Joe Piscopo.
Yeah.
then you make The Untouchables. Then you make a fucking weird documentary series. And so
yeah, it's
all over. So if Alex Garland makes another film, I tell you, I will still watch it. I mean,
oh yeah.
The
like,
Ex Machina.
Let me put all of my angriness about this aside and say, like, he is definitely one of my directors that's on the radar now. Where whenever something comes out of his, I'm gonna want to see it.
Yeah, I say Ex Machina, Annihilation, both great. I loved some of his previous written work with Danny Boyle. I think we mentioned that on the first episode. I mean, I even enjoyed Dredd. I know that one was not too high on some people's list. I thought Dredd was pretty solid.
Me too.
Yeah, and I read his short novella, which terrified the shit out of me. I think it was called The Coma. Okay. He's still on my radar, very much so. So I just want to iterate that just because this one may have fallen flat for me, I'm still very much on the Garland train.
Absolutely. Yeah, the goodwill was built before this. There was bound to be something where it's just like, yep, didn't like that one. I mean, that's true of all my favorite directors. I love the Coen brothers. I don't love every single one of their films.
Oh, God, no. They made some questionable ones.
Yeah. Some that are downright fucking boring and stupid. So, but it doesn't stop me from loving the Coen brothers anyway, and I'm very much into Alex Garland's body of work. Very interested to see Civil War, which is supposed to be his next film coming out, and Kirsten Dunst is in it, I guess. I know that with, all the strikes and stuff like that going on, I don't know when this is going to happen, but that's supposedly his next film. I don't know what it's about either. It's just evidently the title is Civil War.
Okay.
But I will be there. I want to see it. And we'll add on to the Alex Garland arc, and we'll talk about it here, I'm sure.
I'm into it.
All right. Well, in the meantime, we're going to let you folks go. But please keep up with us. You can find us on X at Screen Sermon. Of course, you could always just comment on the YouTube videos. That's an easy way to get to us. And thank you to everybody that's done that. And alternatively, you can send us an email at screensermonpod@gmail.com. Give us your recommendations, your suggestions, feedback, all that kind of stuff. We want to read it. We want to know what you think. We want to adapt your thought processes into the show as much as possible. So keep that in mind, and we will speak to you folks next week, where we will be looking at, I think at least, an international horror movie called #Alive. So we'll be taking a look at that next week. But in the meantime, this is the Boon, and Inky, thanks a bunch for being with me.
Thanks for having me, Boon. Thank you, listeners, and sorry you couldn't be here, SR, but thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, F in the chat for SR and his damn phone and the app not letting him on the call today. I'm sure he would have been the opposing voice to us, trying to convince us what was good about this film. But
we're gonna set up a GoFundMe to get him a nice HP Elite book. That way he can join us next time.
Yeah, please donate to SR's laptop fund. We need to get this man a computer, for God's sakes. But yeah, in the meantime, folks, we'll let you go this week, and we'll be back next week with another movie review. But until then, it's the Boon.
I'm Inky.
And we'll see you all later. And just one last thing. But why?